Welcome back. East African Portland Cement has become the latest company to announce a retrenchment plan. The cement maker plans to axe all of its employees. It says the move is aimed at cutting costs and at the same time return the cement maker back to profitability. Now that's the latest company. Around 15 out of 62 listed companies at the Nairobi Securities Exchange have announced that they are not making enough money in terms of profits. So you're looking at a climate whereby businesses are not doing well. They're complaining about the state of operations when it comes to the cost element. And at the same time, the first part on their beat when it comes to restructuring plan is asking employees. To give us more information in relation to this, we are joined by Patrick Obath. He is a trustee at the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. He also the former chairman at the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. Welcome to the program. I mean, East African Portland Cement plans to cut all of its employees? I mean, that's shocking.
It may be shocking, but when you're in dire straits like the company is in at the moment, it's been having profits, it's been getting higher and higher losses year by year, and almost doubled in the last 12 months. You have to take drastic action. And it means a complete restructuring. It means taking on different kinds of people. It means maybe even changing technology. And all this without having an investor from outside coming in to bail out the company. So they've got to work within the amount of money they have, and the major shareholder is the government, and the government of Kenya does not have that much money to invest. So ideally, people will be all laid off, and I'm sure, like any other responsible company, they will actually offer the people they've laid off the first opportunity of coming in a restructured organization.
Let's go way back to 2012, because this is just the specific year that all this stretch of problems actually started for the cement maker. We're looking at increasing costs. More people wanted more money when it comes to salaries. We're also looking at the management. You spoke about the shareholding structure. Government has at least through NSSF, it has about 27%. It also has through the National Treasury about 25%. And you also have the Lafarge Holcim coming in with about 42% and other small shareholders with about 6%. There have been concerns in terms of management at boardroom wrangles, and at the same time, the cost element in terms of increasing salaries. What do you make about this?
Let's focus not just on the East African Portland Cement, but let's look at Kenya as a manufacturing destination. One of the challenges that we suffer as a country is that our cost of production is high, based on various factors. One of them is the cost of labor. And if you look at some of the most successful countries, the cost of labor is determined to be in line with the growth of the economy, the GDP. So you cannot increase the cost of labor more than the cost of the GDP. Because if you do that, then it means your cost of labor is growing faster than the cost of production in the country. And therefore it means that our manufacturing will actually be more expensive than in other countries. And if you go back in the last 10, 15 years, a lot of companies have actually relocated their manufacturing facilities from Kenya to places like Egypt, South Africa, and some of them import from the Far East directly. And it is cheaper for them to bring them in that way than actually manufacture in Kenya. So we really have to look at the cost base of our manufacturing industries in Kenya. Companies like East African Portland Cement need to really invest and restructure themselves to be able to compete, not with imports, but with the other cement companies in Kenya. If you look at that sector over the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, you've had a lot of new companies coming in. Mombasa Cement, Savannah Cement, all those kind of companies have come in with the latest technology, more efficient, better use of power. And if you are not able to invest and catch up with those people, you will fall into where East African Portland Cement has fallen into. And you also have, I think, to correct at the beginning, you talked about this NSSF who's a shareholder. You've also got the government, which is a shareholder. Now, neither of those two organizations can actually put money when you talk about investment. And if you're going to need maybe about another 1-2 billion shillings to be invested in the company, then effectively the government has to invest 25% of that. NSSF has to invest 27% of that, and then Lafarge Holcim puts in 42%. And we've seen companies where this kind of structure has been there, and because of the inability of the government to invest, those companies have gone down. One of them was my old employer. I used to work at the refinery in Mombasa. And when it came to investment, the refinery has gone down purely because the government was unable to invest in these kind of industries.
We'll talk a little bit about that later, but it's not only the manufacturing sector that is affected. We have Nakumatt also, announcing job cuts. We also have other key sectors, fast-moving consumer goods. It's not only the manufacturing sector. So what is happening? What is the state of the business operating environment in the country?
I think the first one is what I talked about earlier on. The cost of labor in this country is very high. And that means that companies, if they cannot rejig their businesses to be more efficient, they're going to go down. And the first place you look at is basically your labor costs, because they are high in this country. The second thing that is happening, a lot of companies are going digital, right? We are known as the Silicon Savannah, and it means that there's a lot of innovation happening in Kenya. People are buying off apps. People are getting delivered by boda bodas. So I don't need to go to a supermarket. I can order online and it's delivered to my house. And you can order food directly from the various food outlets, your Kenchicks, your Kentucky's, your whatever it is, and they will put it on a boda and bring it to your house. So even the transport sector is also suffering. So ideally, we should actually rethink Kenya and start thinking about a Kenya whereby we are going digital, we are going more efficient, and we are using the ability to conduct efficient business through internet and so forth. And that is going to mean that a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, but they will have to then retrain themselves and begin to work in the digital economy. And really, a lot of companies that have retrenched people off, and I'm sure, especially in the you've had telecom, which has put people off. You've got breweries, which have put people off recently. Some of the banks, which have put people off. The story that is not coming through is that a lot of the people who have been laid off have been offered new jobs in the same organization, so that effectively the people who have been able to change with the times are the ones who will be retained, and those who have not been able to change with the times will let go of, and other people will be brought in who are actually more proficient in working with the current technology that's available.
Patrick, let's talk about the cost element. For a company like the cement maker East African Portland Cement Company, at least 40% of its cost is attributed to power. And at the same time, there have been issues around moving cargo from Mombasa and all the way here, the hurdles around it. There have been concerns in terms of taxes that have been increasing over the last few years. Are these some of the concerns when it comes to employers and business owners?
The total cost of doing business is a concern in Kenya. And I think as a business community, we have been pointing out the opportunities that the government has to make things better. And since about 2005, 2006, we started talking about the cost of power. Then what happens? We invest in power, but you don't get rid of the expensive power. We've still got the thermal generators, and even if we don't dispatch power from the thermal generators, we still have to pay what is called a capacity charge. So even if they're idle, you still pay them anyway. So we have to be bold enough and basically break those contracts and maybe even buy them out and be able to sort of stop the payments in terms of the long-term debt that they have, and then begin to use the more affordable renewable energy that we have. Take the case of the SGR you just mentioned. The SGR in principle is a great idea, but right from the beginning when the SGR was being commissioned, as an industry group we said we have to streamline the whole clearing and forwarding and also the evacuation from the Nairobi depot back into the economy. Now, we kept saying, please ensure that Nairobi depot is going to be a place where the cargo stays for no more than 1 day, and then it goes out. Right now, cargo is staying there for a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, because of inefficiencies in terms of the whole clearing process. And until that is sorted out, the SGR is actually going to add cost to this country. And people are saying now, let's use the road until the SGR is ready. A very valid point, because there's no point forcing people to use the SGR when effectively, for the betterment of the manufacturing sector and the economy of the country, it is cheaper to do it by road at the moment. So really, I think the cost of production in this country is burdened by a lot of different elements in the economy. Tax we have to pay as a tax. We need to pay tax in the country in terms of ensuring that we get services. But the point is the services we are getting are actually themselves not efficient. So the Kenya Revenue Authority and the Treasury are increasing taxes, but we are not efficient in the way we use our taxes. Again, it comes back to the cost of labor, it comes back to the inefficiencies that we have in the delivery system.
International lenders such as the World Bank have been very quick to give Kenya a very good report card when it comes to doing business in the country. When we have such statistics coming out that there are quite a number of layoffs that are actually happening in the country, does this paint a negative picture when it comes to an investment destination?
The ease of doing business index that the World Bank and other institutions are actually doing looks at several factors. And the improvement in the ease of doing business in Kenya has been on just a few of the factors that we look at. And we've come from, I think, a position of 132 to about 62, which is a fantastic improvement. But what were the key things that made that happen? One was the fact that we actually updated the Companies Act, which means in terms of the legislative framework for doing business, we actually moved a huge way forward. And that was one of the big things that brought us from where we were to where we are now in terms of the ease of doing business. And then the issue of just starting up business, getting your licenses. How many licenses do you have? So a lot of them are basically process-based issues that allowed us to go from where we were to where we are now. But the next thing is now to improve the efficiency of doing business. And that to take us from the 62% where we are now, position 62, to move us into the 40s is going to take a lot of doing. And the very questions you're asking now are the ones that have to be addressed to improve the ease of doing business index so we can be able to attract more players in the country. There are still some regulatory areas that need to be looked at. And one of the key ones is what I call policy certainty. If we're going to be changing taxes every year, and I've got an investment based on the tax of this year, the tax framework of this year, and that investment, I don't expect a payback for at least 8 or 10 years. If you begin changing the tax regime every year, it means that as an investor, my business model is going to be disturbed every year. So there has to be a way whereby if we are going to change any policy that affects business, the policy has to be stated that we are going to pass a legislation in this year, but the legislation will be effective in 3 years from now. So it then allows us as the industry to renegotiate our loans, renegotiate our business model, relook at it and restructure it and change the way we work. So by the time that regulatory change kicks in, we are ready for it. But to keep changing it every time, again, that is another item that is not favorable to businesses coming to this country.
According to the 2019 Kenya Economic Survey, about 848,000 jobs were created last year. Data that has been backed up by State House. But is this the situation on the ground, or there is a disconnect?
I mean, we have to understand where those jobs were created. If you talk about the formal sector, which is basically the public and the private sectors, yeah? The growth in employment, net growth in employment, from 2013 up to now has been 500,000 jobs. About 50, so that's about 100 million every year. Right? So that's a net growth over 5 years. But the biggest growing sector is actually in the informal sector. Now, if you talk about a percentage growth in the informal sector, and look at the figures, in the formal sector, the total employment is 2.9 million as of 2018. In the informal sector, it's 11.5 million. And that has been growing. So when you talk about the growth of jobs, it's basically in the informal sector where the main growth has happened. So that 800,000 jobs, out of that, in 1 year, only about 100,000 are from the formal sector. The other 700,000 is the growth in the informal sector. And in reality, if you're going to grow this economy, we really have to focus on the efficiencies in the informal sector. And those efficiencies can only be achieved if the service delivery by government happens. We need transport, because in the informal sector, people are relying on public transport. We need power that works so that they can actually, because they can't afford to have generators and standby generators or stuff like that. So when power goes, they're not working. We need good roads. We need efficient delivery in terms of infrastructure like the SGR and so forth to bring things in. We need efficient clearing. So if I've got my pre-clearance in Italy or my goods coming in, we should be able to create a lot more green channels so that when goods are coming in, they come in through the green channel and they're out within a day. And if we are able to do that, then the informal sector can actually grow the employment in this country drastically.
Patrick Obath, thank you so much for coming to the program. Of course, we have been speaking to Patrick Obath. He is the trustee at Kenya Private Sector Alliance. He is also the former chairman of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. Of course, he has been shedding light when it comes to the job cuts that have been announced in the last few months. Now, of course, we will be going forward in relation to this, and Linda Ogutu joins me with the latest. Linda?
Great. This has been an insightful interview just to help us understand what exactly is happening with the Kenyan economy. She did mention apparently there's all indication that the economy has been growing at a certain percentage. State House at some point saying 800,000 jobs had been created. This is not the only company that is downsizing. So what essentially does that mean for the economy? We are hoping that more companies will not come up with the same structure, just basically laying people off, adding the number of unemployed Kenyans in the line.